a prisoner.
Yeah,
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun. It's absolute panic. Absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. The detectives have their guns drawn. Oswald has been shot. There is no question about it. Oswald has been shot.
April 22nd, 2012. It is a Sunday, and I have the honor of talking to Mr. James Lavelle, who witnessed two important historical tragic events, both of which occurred on a Sunday. So hopefully, Mr. Lavelle, we're not in any danger here sitting in your office. But I'd like to start, I guess, chronologically. Prior to World War II, you served aboard the USS Whitney. You were in the Navy.
Right.
Now that was a destroyer tender, which helped to maintain a destroyer, kept it stocked with supplies.
Supplies for them.
So, what was your capacity on the Whitney? What was your role?
I was a storekeeper, and we kept accounting of all of the supplies and so forth. And when a destroyer needed something, we furnished them everything. I would like to say from toilet paper to torpedoes, anything they needed, even the food. We kept cold storage in there that, of course, we got our beef in whole quarters, and a destroyer would pull alongside, and he'd probably get 2 or 3 quarters of beef at a time, and of course any other thing, ammunition, whatever they needed, we would supply them because that's what we were for. And so my division, the storekeeper division, kept track of all of that.
So about how long were you on the Whitney in that capacity?
Well, I was a little over a year, I think. I probably transferred to the Whitney sometime in April or May, probably, of 1940. I went in the Navy in early part of 1940, and my first duty was aboard of a destroyer, and we did escort duty for carriers. And later on, they had vacancies in the storekeeping department for the over on the Whitney. And on the destroyer, you don't have much. Back in those days, you didn't have much chance of advancing because you had a set amount of people on each ship, and so you didn't. But on the Whitney, it was a bigger ship. We had about 600 people on that ship, and there was opening in different divisions, and so that's one of the reasons I transferred over there. And another reason is I didn't have much choice because they told me I was going to go. They needed me over there, more so than they did on the destroyer, so I transferred. And I'd been over there, well, a year and a half, I guess. Of course.
So, the date I was referring to, the Sunday, the first tragic Sunday I was referring to was December 7th, 1941, which was the day that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And so the USS Whitney was stationed in Pearl Harbor that day. So I have a question. What were you doing when Pearl Harbor first came under attack, when you realized that you were being bombed?
We had just finished up I had, of course, I'm still eating the breakfast on Sunday morning. It's a little bit later than it is during the week. And the shore boat don't leave from the ships until 8 o'clock in the morning going ashore. You see, they had put us on alert back in, I would say, about April or May of 1941. They put us on alert that we were going to go to war with Japan. So every couple of weeks we'd get an alert, and we'd be on alert all the time. We was expecting the war to come, but we was expecting it to be a declaration of war, and we'd go out to sea and meet them man to man. But that wasn't, of course, that wasn't what happened. And this caught us totally by surprise. And on another thing, Saturday was our payday. We got paid twice a month, and Saturday was our payday. So I got $36 a month, and some of the rest of them got $21 a month, and some a little 45, and so well, we had big money people. But they got paid, and so we was ready to go ashore and spend that money. And so that was what a lot of them was already dressed in their whites and ready to go ashore. And I wasn't going right then. I thought maybe I might go later in the afternoon, but I hadn't planned on going, so I was still aboard. And of course my battle station was on a 8-inch gun on the bow of the Whitney. But I didn't fire a shot that day. I didn't kill anybody because the gun that I was a loader on that gun, and once you loaded it, and it was geared to shoot 30 or 35 miles over there at other ships. So if I'd have been fired it on that deal at those planes, they were only half a mile up or less. I'd been killing people over in Honolulu, and so I didn't fire a shot that day. However, we had two 50 caliber anti-aircraft guns on there, and they got into action. And we had one 3-inch anti-aircraft gun up there, and I think it got it. I doubt if any of them hit anybody, because I think our score that day was less than a dozen that we got hit from all of the ships that was firing. So our score was very, very poor that day. But that was what was happening. I had just walked out on deck when they had a boatswain mates there, and we were just passing the time of day, and we saw the first planes coming in, and they saw that red ball under the wing, and he said, "Well, it looks like that plane. They must have been using that for a target plane or something, practice, because we're doing practice all the time." And so he watched it, and just a few seconds later, he dropped his bomb on Ford Island over there for the Navy aircraft, that float planes. And when I'd opened up, he said, "Oh, hell, that's Japanese." And so he got on the loudspeaker, and he said, he blew the battle station call, and he said, battle stations, and he said, "This ain't no bullshit either." So, and so everybody headed for their battle station. But so that's, and like I say, they caught us at the right time, because the people wasn't prepared for it. We just wanted to go ashore, and they couldn't have picked a better time. But as it turned out, I found out later, I had a chance to talk to one of the pilots in '06, and they're the only one surviving. I was over in Pearl Harbor to talk to the 65th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor survivors, and they had searched Japan and found one pilot that was in the raid on December the 7th. The only one they knew was alive, and invited him over to be part of that celebration. And of course there was some other pilots came with him, but they were pilots that flew over the islands later on during the attack, but they wasn't on the raid.
Now, in all this aftermath, that after a certain point, all the citizens had heard over the radio what had gone on at Pearl Harbor. So I'm just curious about how long did it take you to contact your family and friends and alert them, "I'm okay, I wasn't, killed at Pearl Harbor"?
It was over a month. It was a month later, roughly, before we got to be sure that I got any information to my family back here in Texas.
Wow, that's a long time. Why? How did you?
Well, communications. See, we didn't have email and that kind of stuff back then, and all of our mail went by ship from Pearl to the coast and vice versa. So it was a slow train through Arkansas, you might say, before they. And besides that, they wasn't too anxious to. They were more interested in the defense and getting set up for the war than they was communications. And that's see, they matched the lines, and so the Navy took them over. There's cruise ships. They took them over and made troop ships out of them. And So it was just a slow process back then.
Mm.
So I don't know whether it was a month or not, but it's close to it before I was able to send any information to them.
Well, I'm sure they must have been worried sick.
Well, they said they were, so, because they knew where I was, but see, there was about 2,400 servicemen killed that day. That's Marines, sailors, and Army personnel, and another 1,200 wounded and so forth. So that's all they knew back stateside, that there's multiple deaths and wounded. So at that time they really didn't know how many was killed. So that wasn't determined for some time.
So what were you doing during World War II after the Pearl Harbor attack?
After that, well, I got hurt we got caught up in one of those big tornado deal at sea, and we couldn't, the cooks couldn't cook for 3 days. All we had to eat was bologna and sandwiches for 3 times a day. Coffee's the only thing they could make. And but in the storm we had waves that were 75 feet high out there, and it really rocked the ship when it hit it. And so I had started down a ladder with some stuff in my hands, and one of those waves hit and it rocked the ship, and I couldn't grab anything, couldn't grab the railing because I had my hands full, and I fell off of it, and I fell almost as high from this ceiling to the floor and hit on the steel deck on both knees. And in a couple of weeks both my knees was about 3 times the size. I got to where I couldn't walk at all, hardly at all. So when we pulled back in, they told me that I was more of wasn't much of an asset to them, and more of a liability than I was an asset. So they sent me back to stateside, and I got back to stateside, I guess, about in the spring of '42, and then later was sent to convalescent hospital in Southern California, where I stayed until I was discharged. They never would authorize me to go back to sea. The doctors wouldn't authorize me to go back to sea, and so he did tell me, the chief doctor said, well, I'll authorize you to go back to shore duty if you can do shore duty. And I said, well, no, if I go back, I want to go at sea. I don't want to be tied to shore. So about that time, the Army Air Force was putting in a big warehouse for the Air Force over in San Bernardino, California, which wasn't about 20 miles from where they had taken over a big country club and made a convalescent hospital out of it, and that's where they sent me down there. And in fact, that's where I met my wife. She was a nurse there when we got there. But this Air Force group, they come over and talk to the captain, the chief of the hospital, and want to know if there's anybody in the hospital that had any warehousing experience that might be getting discharged. And so the captain said, well, he was a storekeeper, so he come talk to me and asked me if I'd like to come and work for him. And so, but that would be shore duty and still be doing just about the same thing I'd do if I went back to the Navy. And except that the difference was I was drawing $36 a month with the Navy, and they offered me $150 a month, I think, to go for them. I said, well, if I'm going to have to do shore duty, I might as well do it with them and make a little more money out of it. So so I took my discharge and went to work for them.
So after all this and you were discharged and all that, how did you first come into being a police officer, with a member of the Dallas Police Department?
Well, I came back here. I had never. I spent some time with the Air Force out there, and then I came back here in about 45 or something like that, and I went to work for the federal government as an auditor. So I had always thought I'd like police work, even when I was growing up. In fact, I didn't think about it at the time, but when I left high school, I don't know if they still do it nowadays, but when they leave school, one of the students will write a little biography and telling what Joe is going to do and Jim's going to do and Mary's going to be doing 10 years down the road, predicting what they're going to be doing. I don't know if they still do that or not, but that's what we did back in those days. And it was ironic, but the young man that wrote that up and put my article in there in the paper, in the book, said that I was a detective for a big city police department in 20 years. So I got to think about that later on. I forgot about it, but I joined the department here in 1950, early 1950, and at that time you had to work in patrol, uniform patrol for 5 years before you could take a promotional exam. So I got my 5 years in, and then passed my first promotional exam as a detective. And I worked in the burglary division for a while, and then I got an invite to join the homicide division, so I was over there for 10 years.
So earlier we talked about 1941 and the attack on Pearl Harbor. Then we fast forward 22 years, and it's November 22nd, 1963, and President John F. Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas, and within the hour a second person, Officer J.D. Tippit, is also gunned down, and a suspect is arrested in the Texas Theater nearby. His name is Lee Harvey Oswald, and you are the first person to interrogate Lee Harvey Oswald, but not in connection to the Kennedy assassination, but the investigation of the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. So I'm just curious, with all this happening so quickly, was there any inclination in your mind that this might be the same person, the assassin of Kennedy and the killer of Tippit could be one person?
It never crossed my mind from that time on, because who'd have thought the same person would have killed two people 2.5 or 3 miles apart. On that particular day, my partner was on vacation, and I didn't get an assignment. All the other officers in my bureau were given assignments. We had 2 of them riding in a motorcade, and the rest of them were scattered at different places. Most of them was down at the Trademark, where the luncheon was going to be held. But since I didn't have a partner, my captain suggested, said, why don't you just stick around the office and take care of anything that comes in. So that's what my assignment was that day. But I had information of where a armed robbery suspect was holed up that I had a warrant for, and they furnished me a man from the patrol division to come up there and work with me that day. So I told Charlie, I said, let's go and see if this information's any good. So we drove out to this place where he was supposed to be staying, and sure enough he was there. So we arrested him and started back into the office with him. And on the way in, we were listening to the police dispatcher, because he's keeping track of where the motorcade was. And as we pulled into the basement where Oswald was later shot, and we stopped the car and got out, the radio was saying that they were approaching Houston Street off of Main Street. So they hadn't made their turn yet on Houston Street when we turned the radio off and got out and had walked through the basement and catch the elevator up to the 3rd floor where my office was. And when I walked in, my lieutenant said, well, they shot the president. And I said, oh yeah, they sure did. And I thought he was kidding me, because I had just been listening to the motorcade and had nothing happened. And so it happened between the time I got out of the car and passed through the basement, caught the elevator to the 3rd floor where my office was.
So Oswald was interrogated over the course of the next few days. So what was he like? What was that like, interacting with Oswald?
Well, he, of course, I went to my lieutenant told me to put that prisoner up and get down to the Elm and Houston Street and find out what was going on and call him, because we didn't have the cell phones and the walkie-talkies and all that kind of stuff, so we could keep up with what was happening. And the dispatcher only had what somebody called in to him. So I went down. We went down. I couldn't get all the way down there because traffic blocked, and I had to park and walk. But anyway, in the meantime, when I got there, at the school book depository, there was an inspector of police on the front steps, and I asked him, I said, "You got the building covered front and back?" And he said, "Yeah." There's nobody get in and out. But he said, "There's a witness over at the sheriff's office," and so I knew that he told me my office was upstairs. So I went over to talk to them, to check on them to see, because witnesses have a way of changing their stories from time to time. So I want to get the first impressions down. And I went over there and there was about 15 or 18 people in their show-up room waiting. And to make a long story short, there some officers showed up from murder and theft to come in, and they were able to take those statements. But at the meantime, they dispatched the sheriff's squawk box, as we called it, was on, and then the information come in about the officer in Oak Cliff being shot. So I picked up the phone and called my lieutenant. I said, "Who's covering that officer shooting?" And he said, "I don't have anybody to cover it." And I said, "Well, I'll take it." So I turned to Red Edwards, one of the senior officer with this group of 6 detectives who showed up. And I said, I knew if anybody had a car, he did. So I asked him, I said, "Where'd you leave your car?" And he said, "Right in the middle of Houston Street." And I said, "Well, let me have the key because I got an officer down in Oak Cliff and I can't get to mine." So I took his car and went to the scene of the officer shooting. And I talked to the witness briefly and what have you, and then they arrested Oswald and brought him in. And since I couldn't get to the theater because of the traffic, I told them to go into my office with him and I'd meet him there. So that's what happened, but they got there before I did. They was in the marked car. And when I come in, they had him sitting in one of our interrogation rooms, which is just a small room with a desk and 2 chairs. And so I went in and sat down and started talking to him. And he was very polite to me. He wasn't sarcastic or anything, and he answered my questions, but he didn't answer them truthfully. And I was trying to reach some kind of rapport with him, and so I told him, I said, "Lee, you strike me as being a pretty smart individual." I said, "You know that we can take that pistol you had on you in the theater and run ballistics on it, and it'll match the bullets that came out of the officer." And he said, "Well, yeah, I know that, but you'll just have to do that. In other words, you may convict me and send me to the electric chair or the penitentiary for life, but I'm not going to help you do it." And I have worked 2 other officers' murders, so when but he denied shooting anybody. When I told him, I said about shooting on, he said, "I didn't shoot anybody." So I didn't think about that until later. I got to thinking, well, the reason he answered it that way was because he knew we was going to tie this other one on pretty quick. So he's getting his denial in early. I didn't shoot anybody, which it did. But at that time, I didn't have a clue. I didn't even cross my mind that he would be the one who shot the president. But as I said, I asked him, I told him what we could do with the bullet, and he said, "Yeah." So it wasn't, well, I hadn't been in there for 20 or 25 minutes, I don't guess, until the captain come back from the school book depository. They'd found the rifle and all that, everything down there, and he asked Mr. Truly, the manager of the school book depository, to do a head count to see if all of his employees were there. And so they did a head count, and Oswald was the only one missing. So the captain, being a suspicious man like he is, he said, "I need to talk to that man. Where is he? And how did I find him?" So he got his address, but it was a wrong address. He hadn't given him his right address. But he came back up here and getting ready to send people to different directions to look for him. And somebody said, "Well, that man that Leavellet's talking to in there's got a name similar to that." And so he opened the door and asked me what his name was, and I told him. And he looked at Lee and he said, "Where do you work?" And Lee said, "At a school book depository." And the captain said, "Well, you're the man I want to talk to." So I lost my prisoner. He took over, and I never did question him anymore. Captain took it on from there. But that was the first inclination that I had that he's going to be good for both murders. However, he was assigned to me, so that's the reason I had the rest as my prisoner, because when you answer a murder call, like I did on Tippett, whoever answers the call gets that assignment. So so J.D. Tippett's murder was assigned to me to work on.
So that is, so you lost him as far as interrogation, but you still, he was still your prisoner, so that is why you were handcuffed to him during that famous transfer?
He was my prisoner, and so it was up to me to, when the transfer got ready to go, that I would be the major one to handle the transfer. And so that's how that came about.
So of course, the second Sunday that I was referring to was November 24th, 1963, 2 days after the Kennedy and Tippett murders. Lee Harvey Oswald was being escorted out of the Dallas City Jail, and Mr. Lavelle here was handcuffed to Lee Harvey Oswald, and Oswald was then shot during the transfer by a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby, and the instance was captured in a famous Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph by Robert Jackson. So I have a question. Why was Ruby able to get right down there where he was? I know there were the city jail there. There was two.
You don't know how he got in the basement. What your question is.
Right, because I know that there were two entrances and there were police officers at this one entrance, but he was able to walk down the Main Street ramp right to where he eventually shot Oswald. So why were there no officers at that other ramp?
There was officers. They had one.
Oh.
That was another one of our mistakes. We only had one officer there because there wasn't nobody on that side, on the entrance ramp. On the exit ramp where we were supposed to come out, they had 5 or 6 police officers over there. But because we had a crowd of 40 or 50 people or better waiting to see us come out. So they had several officers on that one. And that was not having more officers on that entrance ramp was where our mistake comes. So it was a break of about 5 or 6 seconds that let him get in there. I transferred Ruby the next day, but I didn't tell the news media I was going to do it, and I didn't handcuff myself to him. But I transferred him the next day, and we used just a single car for the transfer. But when I was transferring him, he wanted to wear my hat and my coat and all of this. He's afraid somebody's going to shoot him. And I said, Jack, there ain't nobody going to shoot you. In the first place, you ain't worth killing anyhow. So nobody's going to shoot at you. But he thought they was, and so we had arranged a system when the captain and the officers would pull into the basement. He'd call me early and talk to me and ask me about what I thought about transferring Ruby. And I was in the office and he was downtown and at the bus station, I believe he said. And he said, "What do you think about transferring Ruby?" And I said, I think it's a good idea. So he said, "Do you think we'll get in trouble?" And I said, "Captain, if you tell me to transfer him, I ain't going to be in trouble. You might be in trouble if somebody raises Cain about it, but I won't be, because you'll take the heat, not me." And so he said, "What time is your watch?" And so we synchronized our watches, and he said, "Well, I've got the officers here, and we'll pull into the basement at such a time." And so he said, "Get whoever you need to help you, and we'll take him, we'll pull in there, and if it says everything looks right, well, we'll stop." But he said, "If there's something looks wrong, we'll just keep driving right on through the basement." So I arranged it where I had a lookout to tell me when the car was going to be pulled up into right across the entrance to the basement. And when they did, we started out with Ruby, and he outrun me. He broke off, run and got in the car. He beat me by 20 steps almost. He got in the back of the car because there's an officer in the back seat, and we were going to put him in between us. And so, but he run ahead of me and got in the back of the car and got out on his hands and knees behind the front seat. So I crawled in there and put my feet on him, and that's the way he went down to the county jail. But before all that had happened, I asked him why he shot Oswald, and he said, "Well, I just wanted to be a hero." And he said, "Looks like I messed things up good." I said, "Well, you can say that again." And I said, "Well, how did you get into the basement?" Because I said, it was washed out. I know they emptied the basement and had the officer look at all the cars and everything and see that there was nobody in there. And then the only people that got in there was a newsman that had credentials and stuff. I said, how did you get into the basement? And he told me that he went to Western Union and sent $20 money order over to one of his girls in Fort Worth. And said, when I got that done, he said, I walked out and I looked up there and there was only one officer in front of that entrance ramp. And he said, I thought I'd walk up there and look down and see what I could see was going on. He knew the transfer was being made. He said, I knew they wouldn't let me in the basement, but he said, I could see something down there. And he said, just as I walked up to the entrance of that deal, there was a car came out the wrong way, a marked squad car, driven by Lieutenant Pierce, and it had a sergeant with him. And this officer turned his back and walked about 10 steps out into the street to hold up traffic so he could make a left turn and go around the building. And he said, as soon as that officer turned his back and started out in the street, he said, I just darted behind that squad car and went down that ramp and mixed with the news people and worked my way to the front. So that's how it had a break of about 5 or 6 seconds probably altogether, how he got in there. And I double checked that later on. When he told me that Lieutenant Pierce was driving a car, I started asking the officers in the basement who drove that car out, and none of them remembered who drove it out. And till I got to the captain, and he said, oh, I sent Rio Pierce out with it. So when he told me in advance that Rio Pierce drove that car out and nobody else did, and the reason he knew Pierce was Pierce had worked Vice for a long time, had been in and out of his club a lot, so he knew him personally. So when he saw Rio Pierce driving, and so when he told me that, and then I checked with the captain, he said, oh, I sent Rio Pierce out with it. And so when he told me that, I know that's the way you had to get in, because nobody else knew it. Not even my own officer down there knew who was driving the car out. So, and then I did another thing. I went to the Western Union and talked to the man that issued him the money order. And I told him what I wanted. I said, I want you to go through the same procedure that you did with, I think it was a $25 money order he sent to the girl. I said, I want you to go through the same procedure with me. And he said, well, as I recall, Ruby gave me two $20 bills. And he said, I filled out the money order and stamped it, and he gave me the money, and I made the change and to him. And so when he did done the same thing, when he stamped that money order, I started timing it, and then I walked out because it was stamped at 11:17. So I started timing it, and I walked from there up to the ramp 3 different ways, in a fast pace, a regular pace, and then a little slower one, and I averaged them, and it took me well, the best about 2.5 minutes to do that, to cover it all. And so, and the shooting in the basement occurred at 11:21, and that's only 4 minutes difference there. And it could be even less, because I don't know how long it took somebody to call the dispatcher and tell them to order an ambulance for so it could have been a little less. But I told them, the conspiracy people, when they were talking about that, I said, you can't choreograph anything closer than that, because 4 minutes from the time he was shot until he walked, 4 minutes from the time he was a block away getting that deal, and then walking in there and shooting Oswald. I said, you can't choreograph anything any closer than that. Then they wanted to say, well, there was an imposter that went down to the Western Union and sent that in his name. I said, well, that'd be fine and dandy. But I said, I also got the copy of that paid telegram, and he sent out of his shirt pocket. I said, how did the imposter get that into his pocket? In that, if that's the case. Well, we haven't figured that out yet. I said, I think you got a lot more figuring to do. So I have been able to blunt everything that they've come up with over the years. And because I spent a lot of time on that case. But that's how he got in there. And, I got in the ambulance with him and went to Parkland, and he lapsed into unconscious almost immediately. I saw when I walked out, come out with him, all of the floodlights came on, and it blinded me temporarily. But I could look down underneath the lights, and I could see from here down on everybody. And Ruby was standing in the middle of that driveway with that pistol in his hand on his leg, and I saw this. And that's when I jerked back on him. That's the reason he was kind of humped over and turned, because I jerked back on him trying to pull him behind me, but I was right against him. I didn't have any leverage. If he'd have been out here arm's length, I could have jerked him plumb off his feet. But I just turned his body enough that instead of it hitting him dead center, it hit him about 4 inches to the left of the navel. He went through the stomach, clipped a vena cava on the back. Went through the liver, took a chunk out of it, and then cut a main artery over here on the right-hand side, and then hit the end of the 7th rib over here and glanced off and landed about here on him, and was trying to get coming through the skin. But I turned him over and checked on it. The bullet was sticking up like that through the skin. I could take it and roll it around on my finger. And so when people ask me how close he come to getting shot, I said just the thickness of the skin, because if it hadn't hit that rib, it had come on through and hit me along about here. But that rib turned it and stopped it, and it lodged. So when I got into Parkland Hospital, I took him in the operating room, and doctors had been notified, and they was all standing by ready to go work on him. And I said, before you do anything else on him, I want that bullet out of here. And so they just turned him over a little bit, pinched it up and hit it with a scalpel, and it dropped off into a tray that a nurse was holding. And so I immediately wiped it off with some tissue paper, and I took my pocket knife out, which had a sharp point on it. I told her, I said, I want you to take the butt of that bullet and scratch your initial on it while I watch, because you and I are going to be testifying this is the bullet that came out of him in court later on, because I knew that was coming, and which we did. I testified 2 or 3 times. I know she did at least once, but I got that bullet out and identified it, and so consequently, when in court proceeding, we never had any trouble with it.
Well, I know you don't personally believe any of the conspiracies relating to...
I'll correct you a little bit. Not only do I not believe, I know better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, then you know better than to believe in any of the conspiracies relating to the assassination. And but there are many conspiracists out there today, you know, believing Oswald and Ruby were together, or you know, something. And in fact, as crazy as this sounds, I actually have a teacher that was suggesting to me that you and Ruby might have been in cahoots. It was
Oh well, I've been accused of that too.
Yes.
I had some anonymous letters. I got them here somewhere. I got a lot of anonymous letters after it happened, and I just threw them away for a while. And I thought, well, I better keep some of them. So I kept some of them. I think one of them says, how much did the mafia pay you to let Ruby get in there and shoot? Oh yeah, I went all through that too. And the same way they've accused our police department of being in cahoots on it. They've accused the FBI and the Secret Service and Castro and Russia and Italian mafia. And you think of it, the conspiracies had everybody working on it. We'd had a crowd here in Dallas. We'd had all of them involved in it. But I have been able to run down everything that's happened, and I've been able to answer every allegation they've made. In fact, I did an interview with them. They wanted me to come down to their meetings. They used to have meetings down every November, and I guess they still do maybe. But they'd have 200 or 300 people show up down there in November. And I told them I didn't have time for that, and so finally they kept after me, and I went down to appear before them they had somebody else, I don't remember who else was. We were going to be a question and answer thing, and so, but most of the people that lined up to ask the questions were shooting at me more than there was anybody else. But I told them, I said, if this was in the early 80s, I guess, sometime, and or might have been a little earlier than that, I don't know for sure now. But I told them, I said, if I I said, I want to make a deal with you. I said, if you could bring me credible evidence of any other shooter involved in this thing, I said, I'll take it to the grand jury. I'm no longer work for the police department, but I still have the authority to go before the grand jury. And I said, I'll take it and go before the grand jury with it if you'll bring me credible information that there's another shooter. But I said, I don't want nothing, no BS on it. I said, I want something to stand up in court, and don't bring me nothing like that. And in fact, I talked to the DA, and I told him what I was going to do before I went down there. I said, I'm going to use your name, and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going before that group, and I'm going to tell them to give me, if they can give me any credible evidence that there is another shooter, well, let me know, and I'll take it to the grand jury. He said, fine, you do that, and I'll go with you. So I'll go with you down there. So to this day, there's nobody brought me anything to credible. There was one young man come up at our break, when we had a break. He come up with a stack of stuff about this high, set up on the table where we were sitting. He said, I got it all laid out for you right here. And I said, laid out? What do you got laid out? He said, the other shooter that was involved in this. And I said, oh really? I said, you don't really think I'm going to go through all that stuff you got stacked up there, do you? He said, well, yeah, he said, it's all there. I got it on this film right here, tape. And I said, well, just for the fun of it, tell me who your shooter is. And he said, William Greer. I said, William Greer? Yeah. Are you nuts or something? And he said, no, that's right. William Greer was the one that was driving the president's limousine. And he said, he turned around just like this and shot him with his pistol. And I said, no, he shot right in front of Mrs. Kennedy and right behind John Connell and his wife. And the other agent sitting over there, and they didn't know about it. Well, he was going to come on with that crap that the other agent was involved in it. But I said, certainly his wife wasn't involved in it. Well, I said, I'm surprised somebody hadn't come up with that already. But she's the only one that didn't get blamed, as far as I know. But anyway, that was it. And I said, I know I'm not going to look through that now. So I said, if I went over there with something like that, I said, they'd have the man with the white coat coming after me. And I said, I'm not going to do that. So he said, well, take this VCR, it's all on there, and look at it. I said, all right, I'll take that with me. So he hauled all that other crap off, and I took that VCR, and when I got home with it, I tossed it up on the shelf, and it stayed there for several weeks before I happened to think about it one day. I said, well, I'll look and see. And he had about the same bunch of stuff in it that he was telling me. But he'd say, well, the fact is, and he'd start in this direction, he'd go a little bit, and he said, well, the fact is, and then he'd go this way, and then the fact is, and he'd go this, after about 4 or 5 of those, the fact is, and I just shut it down and sent it back to him. I said, using the vernacular of talking, I said, the fact is, you haven't got nothing here, so I don't want it. I don't have nothing to do with it.
So Oswald had his rifle that he used to shoot the president. Then he had the weapon that he used to shoot Officer Tippit, and then Ruby had his gun that he used to shoot Oswald. So I was just curious, with all of these shootings, has this impacted your view of stricter gun control at all, or any? Or
if anything, it makes me think we need more firearms on the street. No, not at all. I think the Second Amendment should stay like it is.
So one last question, Mr. Lavelle. You not only lived through the attack on Pearl Harbor and the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, but you were there. You experienced those historical events. So I just have a question: has witnessing these events consciously impacted how you've lived your life?
Well, I made it a practice early in my police career not to take my work home with me. So therefore I didn't bring it home, anything that happened while doing my work included this. The only change, and it didn't change my life any at all, I didn't let it do that, but for a long time, it was difficult for me to walk down the street without somebody recognizing me, wanting to stop and ask me questions. And I was never one to be impolite. I haven't got time for you or anything. I'd go ahead and talk to them a little bit. But other than that, and then having I don't know how many thousands of autographs I've signed that people have sent to me. And here just last year I had an accident of my own where I fell. I was up in the state of Virginia at my daughter's house, and I hit the floor with this left eye. Probably hadn't realized, but I'm blind in this eye.
Oh no!
And so they had to take the eye out. But but I was up there for an incident at that time to appear on something. But it's one of those things that happen. But I don't let what happened interfere with my regular life or interfere with my family's life any. And it's just I get recognized a lot. I was in the airport out in Salt Lake City one time, and I had to transfer from one another. But I just walked across and sat down in front of there's empty seats over except for one man. He was sitting next to the window. So I sat next to him. He had he's sitting at the window, and he had bags in this next seat. I sit down next to him, and he's reading a paper when I sat down. And he kept on reading, and for a little, then he very carefully folded up that paper and laid it down on his baggage. And he turned around and he said, "Mr. Lavelle?" I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "I thought that's who you were." And he introduced himself and told me that he was flying to Oklahoma and he had to come through Dallas to get there. So he talked to him. But then things like that happens quite often, and but it can't be helped. I never let that bother me. I go ahead and answer their questions, and I get many calls from schools and colleges and what have you. And so, of course, you're talking about school kids, for instance. I started off doing these talks for the school kids, and I never charged anybody, any of them, for it. If I had to go out of town, which I've gone to Alaska, to Hawaii, to Louisiana, I've talked in about 15 different states, I guess, altogether. And I've never charged anybody for making any of these talks. If they want to donate something, fine, but I don't ask them for anything. Felt like this when I started out after doing all the work on that assassination that I did, especially with the school kids. I wanted them to know the truth. You look up there at that bookcase and you'll see many books up there, and those books were written for one thing, and not to make money off of. And if they just go ahead and write the truth about the assassination, nobody's going to buy it. So they have to spice it up and have some suspects in it. Just like in one case, they came from London over here to interview me, and they're doing a documentary, and they spent I don't know how much time over here, and they told me how they was going to handle it real diplomatically and so on. And I said, all right, I went along with them. And when they got back to Europe, they was over in France, and they run across a man over there and over here during the assassination. So he said, and he gave him a big long story about the mafia Frenchman doing it, killing him. And so they filmed that. Well, I heard about it, and when they finished that, there's a man and a lady doing it together. Well, she flew back over here and brought me a copy of that and wanted me to view it and then critique it on a little five space tapes. And I said, I don't have to. I already heard what you had over there. You had this one. Well, it's so truthful. I said, I'll tell you what, if you go back 10 years or so, 15, and you look him up, and you'll find that he was in Italy, and he was telling the same story over in Italy, except he had the Italian mafia doing just what now he's having the French mafia doing. The same man telling the same story. I said, go back and look it up. You'll find it. It's on there. And so she did, and I hadn't heard no more out of that. But that's what I about this. And of course, I've had preachers and lawyers and doctors and everything else tell me stories about, oh, they saw Ruby and Oswald together. I had one lawyer come up with a long story that he was sitting in Ruby's club one time and with his girlfriend, and Oswald came in and sat down at the table. It was 3 months before the assassination, and they sat there and talked about killing somebody. And Ruby told him, said, well, you shouldn't be in here. Well, I got a copy of his letter. It's here. And he sent this to J. Edgar Hoover. And J. Edgar Hoover saw it, and he sent it right back to them. Of course, we ended up with it. I didn't have, it's one of those things, a lot of times I say we did this, I mean that I did it, or even my department did, or my bureau did it, but some of our police officers did. And in this case, I turned that over to the Intelligence Division. And they finally run down his girlfriend that was with him that night, and she made a affidavit. She said, not only did we not see Jack Ruby that night, we didn't go to the Carrot Club. She turned out to be $100 a hooker, and she said, we spent the night in the hotel. We didn't go down there. Well, I brought this lawyer in. Now, this is a lawyer. We were looking for somebody that was dependable and you think was credible to prove that they put them two together, and what better we thought with a lawyer. We brought him in. I said, well, we know that you're telling us the truth in this letter, but they won't put you on this polygraph and take a polygraph test to prove it to us so we can... Oh, well, I can't do that. Then he broke down and told us, well, he made the whole thing. He said, I just knew y'all were going to make a connection sooner or later between them, and I could get in on the ground floor with some publicity. That's what we had to put up with. I had a preacher. This preacher said that he had was walking in the mornings, and he met Ruby and talked to him. And one morning while talking to him, this young man walked up and said, and Ruby said, this is a friend of mine, Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, here's a Baptist preacher that you would think wouldn't lie to you about something like that. And so I had just gone through this deal with the lawyer, so I didn't, now this is something I did run down. So we brought him in and told him, well, we, in cases like this, we put people on the polygraph to prove that the stories are true. And, oh, well, I can't, and then he backed down, he said, and admitted that he made the whole thing up. So this is what we went through, and when I tell you earlier that I checked out everything and I can knock everything in the head that everybody had, just like one man that run a gas station over in Oak Lawn, he said, oh, that morning, he said, Lee came by in his car and gassed it up for him, and later on his wife came by in her car. I said, well, you're probably the last one saw him driving. I didn't tell him that Lee didn't have a driver's license, he didn't know how to drive a car, and they didn't own one, either one of them. But he filled up both their cars. This is what we had to put up with, and that took up many hours of investigation. I don't care what the conspiracy people come up with, I can knock it in the head, because I spent too much time running it down. And if I'd have got to try him in court, I would have proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the one who shot him, and only by himself and without any help. And another thing, I know you've probably heard the story about the 3 tramps in the boxcars behind the book depository. Yeah, you've heard that story. Yes. Well, when they start telling me about what they saw in the boxcar, I just said, yeah, okay, go ahead. There again, I didn't tell them they wasn't in a boxcar behind the book depository. They was arrested 3 or 4 blocks down the street in a gondola car. They wasn't even in a boxcar, but people put them in a boxcar. There, a lot of you'd be surprised the amount of people saw them in a boxcar, but they wasn't there. So that's what we had to contend with, is that kind of stuff all the time, and not one solid bit of evidence. I don't know how many people have told me, oh, I was down in Ruby's club and I saw Oswald in there drinking and carousing. If Oswald had any good points about him at all, he didn't smoke and he didn't drink, and he didn't go around bars. If he had any good value to his life, that would be it.
Well, you're a terrific guy, Mr. Lavelle, and I know you've given tons of speeches and interviews over the course of your life, but this has been a once-in-a-lifetime experience for us, so we can't thank you enough.
Well, you're quite welcome. I wish you great success with it.
Thank you.